Fantastic. Well, good afternoon, good morning, good day to all of you, and welcome to our first virtual convening of the We Are STEM and CTE in the middle grades NSF Includes Planning Grant, which I am delighted to be PI of and to be joined by the NAEP management team who will be facilitating today's convening. And you will get to meet each of them in turn. We have Sylvia Ramos, the Senior Director of Programs, Kathleen Fitzpatrick, our Senior Program Manager, and Mimi Lufkin, CEO Emerita. And Mimi has been involved in all of our NSF Includes projects, as has Kathleen from their inception. So we are delighted to be with you all today, to have this opportunity to convene, to learn from one another, and to engage in the critically important work of really looking at how we can affect change in our spheres of control and influence. So my name is Ben Williams. I'm the CEO of NAEP, the National Alliance for Partnerships in Equity. We are a consortium of 39 states, as well as over 200 institutions of higher education, as well as individual school districts and community members and partners, as well as a foundation that is focused on a shared mission of building the capacity of educators to implement effective solutions that increase student access, educational equity, and ultimately workforce diversity. And the way I like to describe our work is that we help individual actors in education to recognize and interrupt the ways that unexamined biases create barriers to access and opportunity for women and girls, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, individuals with disabilities, and individuals from low-income backgrounds, as well as the broader definition of special populations as defined in Perkins 5. At the individual level, at the institutional level, and at the systems level. And to help us to have agency in taking action to interrupt those patterns in our spheres of control and influence. And we are very excited to be with you all with this project, which is really focused on broadening participation in STEM and CTE in the middle grades, which we have operationalized through our partners and our steering committee as grades 5 through 10. And I'll explain a little bit more about that in a minute. I am delighted to be joined by our co-PIs, if we could advance to the next slide, which includes California Department of Education with Pete Callas, who is Acting Director of Career Technical Education in the state. Angel Malone, South Carolina Department of Education, who is State Director of CTE in South Carolina. Tammy Getz, Executive Director of Utah STEM Action Center, and William Sprankles at Butler Tech of Ohio. And we are delighted to have these critical partners in state leadership as well as local leadership who have joined us in this work, along with many other partners, many of whom may be joining us for the first time today. And in fact, before I go further, I'd like to invite you all in the chat, if you have not already, to please introduce yourselves and tell us what sector you represent. Are you in K-12? Are you in community and technical colleges at the post-secondary level? That's my background before I came into NAEP. Are you at the state level, at a state agency, a nonprofit? Are you in philanthropy, in industry? Tell us about yourselves real quick. Fabulous. We've got folks representing all of those different critical stakeholders in the work of collective impact. And I want to thank you all for joining us in this really important effort. When we have each of those lenses and each of those perspectives represented, it helps us not to fall into the patterns that often happen when we're in our respective silos, but to really be able to learn from one another, to cross-pollinate ideas, to be able to benefit from our collective wisdom. Okay, if I could go to the next slide, please. So today we have the next little under 2 hours together where we want to give you some background around this project. I'm doing some framing now, and then we'll be passing the baton to Sylvia. And we'll talk then about collective impact and what this can mean for your work as well as the work of this project. We are going to be joined by a panel from our IM STEM, Intermountain STEM collective impact work of the last several years, who will be sharing the results of a report that just came out a couple of months ago that is helping to inform the work of this project, We Are STEM and CTE in the middle grades. And I just have to tell you all that We Are STEM and CTE is actually an acronym, the Workforce Education Alliance to realize equity in STEM and CTE in the middle grades. And what we will then do is actually engage in an exercise where we can learn from each other and with each other, and then look at ways that we can be further engaged as we move forward from today. So I'd like to give just a little bit of background and then pass the baton to our project director, Sylvia Ramos, Senior Director of Programs. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So the last year has been absolutely unprecedented, as we all know. But even prior to the total interruption of education and work that we experienced a year ago now, there have been major, persistent gaps in access and opportunity for women and girls, Black, Indigenous, people of color, individuals with disabilities, and individuals from low-income backgrounds in high-skill, high-wage, in-demand programs of study that lead to good jobs with family-sustaining wages in science, technology, engineering, and math through career and technical education. And those gaps have only been exacerbated in the context of the last year. And so this work is more urgent than ever. But the exciting thing is there is a realization of this across so many sectors to a degree that I've not seen in my career. And so I think there's an openness, a willingness to really lean in and look at systems level levers that can lead to change, especially with scalable solutions. If I could go to the next bullet. This is also in the context of Perkins 5, which was signed into law in summer of 2018, which allows for federal resources from the Carl D. Perkins grant, which was the Strengthening Career and Technical Education for the 21st Century Act, to be used for career programming, career and technical education activities all the way to grade 5. CTE throughout the country, as well as the upper level type STEM courses that we often see in high schools, really happen in the 11th and 12th grade. But grades 5 through 10 are such a critical gateway into those courses, and the students' choices and their exposure to opportunities that open up the full possibility of career pathways really happens in those critical middle grades. And that is why we are focusing our efforts on that particular area. We are building this work on the shoulders of work that's come before it. 2 different NSF Includes grants. One is the NSF Includes Design Development Launch Pilot, Intermountain STEM, which you all will be hearing about very shortly, which was is an alliance of 6 states in the Intermountain region: Colorado, Idaho, New Mexico, Nevada, Utah, and Wyoming, who participated. And I'm looking at the closed captioning to make sure I got all 6. I did. That all participated in a 3-year collective impact project focused on broadening participation in STEM and CTE and looking at the key transition points between middle school and post-secondary education where students often fall through the cracks. taking those lessons learned, which we'll be hearing about very shortly, and really using that as we look forward to leveraging the opportunities that we have right now, with also this influx of resources that is coming into education, that through collective impact, we can really harness and be able to scale to really remove those barriers to access and opportunity that still exist in those career pathways that we know are so important in our future economy and in our future work. So what we're really looking at today is one to
Ben, can you unmute yourself?
Oh my goodness, how long have I been muted?
Just a couple seconds.
Oh gosh, okay. So I'm not sure where I got cut off and I apologize for that. What I was saying is we want to invite you to reflect on your own experiences and to share your perspective with us today as we engage in this critical work. And so with that, I'd like to offer a prompt, if we could go to the next slide. So in the chat, let's get us started. And that is, and Snehal is pulling a funny on me, telling me that it's been muted for 10 minutes. I certainly hope not. So what equity needs, challenges, and successes have you experienced with STEM and CTE in the middle grades? What are some of the key things that are really resonating with you right now that you might share with us through the chat? And I'm going to take a look at this. And thank you all for continuing to introduce yourselves. Access to technology outside of school, critical issue, especially with the equity gaps that have been exacerbated in the context of COVID-19, with disproportionate effects on communities of color and low-income communities in terms of access to reliable, high-speed internet and technology. Development of occupational identity and exploration of different career pathways at a young age through interaction with industrial professionals. Thank you for offering that up. So we want to expand the lens through which students look at opportunities, to expand the horizon that they see as an option for themselves. Understanding by middle school counselors and being able to provide up-to-date information for professionals who are working with students, those key gatekeepers, those key resources to students. My own background is in student affairs, so those career counselors are a critical piece of the puzzle. And students not being encouraged to enroll in non-traditional classes, especially in STEM. Excellent. Please continue to offer up these ideas and more as we work through today. And I want to pass the baton over to my colleague, Sylvia Ramos, who will take us forward with the rest of our agenda.
Thank you, Ben. And Mimi, if I could ask you to move to the next slide. Hello, everyone. Good morning, afternoon, and good day. My name is Sylvia Ramos. I'm the Senior Director for Programs at NAEP. And I look at collective impact as an effective approach to collaboration. And what I understand about collaboration is that it must be built on not just a clear sense of what it is that we're trying to accomplish, but also a sense of team and a sense of community. So I actually would like to invite any one of you who have shared a little bit around the equity challenges and opportunities to unmute yourselves and just share with us, what is your why? So why are you here today? Why are you committed to helping us to broaden participation in STEM and CTE. I see someone shared a lack of access to STEM role models and professionals that look like themselves. That is a huge opportunity, challenge and opportunity. Anyone care to unmute themselves?
All right, Sylvia, I will. So hello, everyone. Sanal Bhakta here in sunny Nevada. Many of you have heard this, but my why is I come from the private sector, so I'm not from education. So I kind of saw the lack of diversity, lack of equity, both gender, racial, all that in the private sector. So really made it my passion of mine in education to really address those needs, as well as I have a super excited 14-year-old ninth grader that's going to school finally in a school building that really kind of makes it both professional and personal for me. So that's really why I really do this work. It's both because I want her to grow up in a better world than I worked in and saw when I was working in the private sector.
Thank you, Sanal. And I appreciate what you're sharing, both in terms of your role from a variety of stakeholder roles, so as a parent, but also as a professional in the sector. And I'm also thinking about the different pieces that people are sharing in the chat really speak to why collective impact is something that we should think about, because it recognizes that it is very difficult to create systems change across sectors if we don't have a group of folks that represent the different stakeholder groups within an ecosystem that we're trying to change. And what it does is it offers a space where we can come together to create a common agenda for solving a really complex social problem. And I think there's a recognition in the past few years that there's probably not too many things as complicated as the US educational system. So what collective impact does is just allow us to really think beyond the individual impact, beyond the organizational targeted innovations, and really forces us to think about how we can think about addressing root causes to achieve positive systems change. Out of curiosity, we have a little poll here to get a sense of who's in the room and what might be our collective experience around collective impact. So if you wouldn't mind, Kathleen, sharing the poll with our participants, we want to know how many of you have been involved in collective impact before. And you can feel free to say yes, no, and we included I don't know, because it's not uncommon for people to be invited or voluntold to participate in collective impact work, only to later find themselves figuring out that there's an entire framework behind this. So it looks like quite a bit of us have been directly involved. A smaller percentage have not, and there's still a significant number that are not sure if they've been involved. So speaking of that, we can move on to the next slide. I asked the question about what our experience has been, and we also had that option of I don't know. Because again, it's not uncommon that people will be asked to participate in collaboration. But what I have found in my own collective impact experience is that sometimes we kind of assume that folks have an understanding what collective impact is, as well as the conditions for the work, right? So one of the first things that is included in the process of collective impact is developing a common agenda. And this happens when we can come together and really develop a shared vision for the change that we want to see. And it's a space where we recognize that if we're going to move away from individual organizational perspectives on any one system, we're going to have to clearly define what the challenges or the needs or the problem is, so that we can really develop a consensus and then ultimately think about what might be some activities that we want to engage in order to create the change that we want to see. So with mutually reinforcing activities, we're recognizing that all of these different stakeholder groups excel at one thing, and we want to make sure that we are recognizing that each one of us can excel at one thing that can create the change in the system. But what's even more important than recognizing the one area where an organization can excel is thinking about doing that particular work or activity in a way that is actually coordinated with the other stakeholders in the systems, right? So I think about the example of an organization that may be really focused on exposing young people, maybe even in the middle grades, to careers in STEM and CTE. And maybe they've done a really great job of that. But mutually reinforcing activities would mean that that organization would actually look to how they would work with other stakeholders that could help to reinforce the work they're doing. So for example, that could mean working with a local parent empowerment program to teach parents about the goals of that particular CT and STEM career exposure program, so that they can reinforce what's happening within the program at home as important stakeholders, again, in a child's education. And it also gives you an opportunity to think about, what does it mean to be successful in the work that we're trying to do together, right? So that's where we have the conversation around shared measurements. What is it that we want to measure? How do we know if we've been successful? And ultimately, there's also opportunities to have conversations around how we actually resource the shared measurement approach. And I mentioned earlier the continuous communication, or the importance of collective impact as it relates to creating a sense of team or creating a sense of community behind the work. And so I think it's really important to think about the fact that when we're asking different folks from across sectors who have been historically approaching any one social problem from a very specific, targeted way, to come together with other folks who have been looking at it from a different perspective, it takes time to build trust. It takes time and also a lot of opportunities for interaction and communication to really develop an appreciation for how another partner within the work actually has a different approach to the effort, but that it is also useful, right? So I think this is a space where it's really important that you have tools like a website, newsletters, a lot of opportunities for meetings. And I always say to folks, never underestimate the power of a phone call, right? Sometimes we rely too heavily on technology to build rapport, but what we're asking folks to do is to really come behind a different idea of how to approach the problem, different than typically one organization may look at it, and to broaden their perspective to really think about root causes. So to build, again, that rapport and that sense of trust behind what we're doing as a collective requires a lot of communication. And then the last piece to these conditions, which is not something to underestimate, as I think our ARE panel will share later, is the importance of backbone support organization. So each and every one of the organizations that are typically involved in collective impact have quite a bit on their plate. And so for that reason, there's really a need to have at least 3 different roles within the collective impact model to help facilitate the work that's required. So you typically have a program manager, a project manager rather, a data manager, and a facilitator. And a lot of what's happening with these 3 roles is that you're really coordinating, building, managing the efforts across the different work groups. You're thinking about what specific skills are needed for facilitation, for technology, data coordination, reporting. And there is a laundry list of logistical and administrative details that have to be coordinated throughout the initiative to make sure that the momentum is not lost. So having shared this information, I would love to have folks, again, either in the chat or unmute, whatever you're comfortable with, maybe give some insight on what you think might be some challenges with the collective impact model for systems change, and where you've seen collective impact be successful.
I'm willing to go first. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, so my world for almost 18 years has been CTE, but right now, because of the pandemic, I'm working with students with disabilities. And I found that if the head of the organization understands the importance of CTE and what it offers, and that they're more open to having everybody at the table, then things more can be accomplished. But if you get somebody that's at the head and they are focused on some area that may not be best for, it may sound good to the community, but it's not really helping everybody that should be at the table, then their train kind of stops or derails. So that kind of would be my answer to that, because I've been working really hard prior to this position trying to get subgroups and students with disabilities to be included, because this is so important. In middle school, unfortunately, that's kind of where I started, tends to be the redheaded child, and everybody seems to think that elementary, as I know this is why we're having this meeting in high school, are sort of more important, and they just kind of leave middle school out with funding, just in general. And again, it starts kind of at the top. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. I really appreciate what you're sharing, because it really goes back to that piece around a common agenda. For any of you that are interested in kind of digging in a little bit more on that, the STRIVE network is one of the national collective impact models that is often referred to as kind of a best practice. And when you think about the beginning of their story, they actually, the educators, CEOs, principals, all kinds of organizational heads from a variety of different sectors eventually realized that in order for them to create the kind of change that they wanted to see in education, there was really a need at the very top for folks to put aside their individual agenda and really think about who needs to be at the table so that we can create the kind of change we want to see. So what you're saying is really important and super critical to, again, an effective collective impact body of work. And I appreciate folks, I see there's a lot being shared in the chat, and also appreciate one of my colleagues here serving as a time check. So we can go ahead and move forward. Wonderful. We're going to continue again to just create a space where we can share with one another, and also try to balance that with a very jam-packed agenda. And so I am going to invite our panelists, the lovely folks who worked on the Intermountain STEM network panel, to please unmute And I'd like to introduce to the folks here, Mimi Lufkin, who is the CEO Emerita for NAEP, Selena Connolly, the Associate Director at New Mexico EPSCoR, and Ginger Fitzhugh, who's a Senior Research Associate and Program Evaluator at the Education Development Center, all of whom were involved in this pilot collective impact network. And they're going to provide us with a brief overview, as well as share with us a lot of the lessons learned from this work, so we can be thinking about how we can leverage that into our next collective impact effort.
So I'm going to begin. Welcome everyone. It's so good to see so many people joining us today. The IMSTEM project was really a pilot to test this concept of using collective impact in a national systems change approach. And the 5 elements that Sylvia shared with you that represent the structure around collective impact, we attempted to apply vigorously to our efforts. So I want to share, first of all, our vision and mission, or our common agenda, so that you could see that this is, and we'll talk about this when we get into the successes and challenges. This is one of the pieces of the work that becomes really critical, which is to making sure that all the partners have a shared vision about what we're attempting to do. You'll notice when you read this slide, IMSTEM's vision is to broaden participation and close achievement gaps in 7 through 12 and undergraduate STEM education by scaling effective practices that close these gaps at the critical junctures that limit participation of underrepresented students in STEM pathways. Is a very big vision, lots of potential effect that basically we knew would take many, many years, but we wanted to at least get started on this particular effort that we had 3 years to make some impact. So the intent was to create a cross-state alliance of formal education system partners committed to systems change, to create a culture of success for every student in STEM, ultimately leading to a more diverse STEM workforce. And this is where the model, the collective impact model, came into play, particularly for us. The structure of the work included all of these components. So we had a management team, a steering committee, work groups that formed around particular topics of interest amongst the collective, outreach and growth, data reporting, communication, asset map building, effective practice scaling. And we also included a pilot monitoring process because NAEP in the 6 states have been very involved in providing professional development. So we monitored the implementation of our PD in those 6 states at the same time as one of the effective practice implementation components. Each of the states have their own networks that function, which we connected this work to in an effort to bring folks into the work groups as well as engage in the network activities. The work groups, there's a little more detail on this slide about the work groups, but let me just say that the work groups are really functioned around trying to create some type of a deliverable within the time frame that we had that could be utilized by all 6 states to implement practices that would potentially affect CTE and STEM probably in the much longer term. So I'll share with you one of the deliverables that came out of the effective practice scaling work group, but there were things that were created by all of these work groups. And all the information about the work can be found at this particular address on napequity.org/imstem. It can also be accessed through the We Are STEM and CTE webpage too. But this is an example. We created an evaluation rubric for determining effective practices in STEM and CTE programming. And the evaluation rubric contained a set of standards. There were rubric measurements that could be used for evaluating programs. and recommendations for resources for practitioners who are involved in using this as a tool. And again, this can be accessed on our website as well. The ultimate result, of course, was a report that we released using collective impact to broaden participation in STEM and CTE through a multi-state systems approach that tells you a little more about the outcomes of the work, successes, challenges, and a set of recommendations that we have for others who are attempting to do this work. I would encourage you, if you want to learn more about IMSTEM, to go take a look at the website. We implemented a quarterly network meeting. Those were all recorded and archived on the site, so you can go take a look at lots of really good information about best practices and programs that did wonderful presentations. Those are all there. We also did a monthly newsletter. Those are also all archived, so you can take a look at any of those. There are lots and lots of great resources included in those newsletters too, as well as the deliverables from each of the work groups are also on the website. So, Sylvia, I'm going to turn it back to you and
Great.
For a second, or do you want me just to dive right in?
No, that's okay. We can go ahead, and I think what I'd like to do is invite Selena to answer the first question, which is, in your perspective as a critical partner in the IMSTEM work, what were the things that you believe went really well?
Thank you, Sylvia. It's nice to be with you all this afternoon, and I want to say how much I appreciated being part of the IMSTEM project, but also part of the group that worked on the report. So in reflecting on this question, I think one of the things that was especially effective was having NAEP as a backbone. And Sylvia, you mentioned a couple of times in your introduction and the conditions for collective impact, how important a backbone role is, and that somebody is functioning in that role. You really need somebody whose job it is that every day they're waking up and thinking about all of the different pieces and the communication, all the orchestrating all the different parts in order for that to work. I know probably everybody on this call has been part of projects where it was a completely sort of volunteer effort. Nobody was in charge, and it really fizzles after a while because you don't have somebody who's got the perspective of the overall project. So I certainly appreciated that about IMSTEM, and it gave me some insight into collective impact. And then I just want to piggyback on something that Mimi mentioned, which was the equity rubric. And I think that actually is an outcome that would not have been accomplished by any one of our partners. It really was a collective impact product, and it's fantastic that it's something that is continuing and is available long after IMSTEM, the funding for IMSTEM is over.
Thank you, Selena. I appreciate a couple of things that you've shared. One is that I think sometimes folks do enter collective impact work with a really an unknown, which is the amount of work that goes into collective impact work. It's a lot of work, right? But then you've also named what happens as a result, right? You're able to produce something that would not have been possible necessarily by any one individual organization, and is made richer by the diversity of, again, the folks that are able to participate in the collective impact model. So thank you for sharing that. And Ginger, I don't know if you'd like to add from your perspective, what else you thought went well.
Yeah, hi everyone. Nice to see everybody. I would definitely echo what Selena said about the role of NAEP as the backbone for the IMSTEM effort. My role in the project was to serve as the external evaluator and in collecting survey and interview data from the stakeholders in the project. It was clear that NAEP was almost universally lauded and appreciated for its role as serving as the backbone for the project, and that was partly why it was successful. And they also managed to do it on pretty limited resources, which you'll probably hear us talk more about later on in the panel. I think that another thing that I want to point out as a success of the project is Mimi mentioned the working groups as sort of the structure for getting things done in the project. And of the 5 work groups that ended up kind of moving forward, the ones that were the most success were the ones that had a very clear shared vision of what their role was in the project, and then had a concrete task and a deliverable to work on. One of them being the rubric that Selena was just referring to as an outcome of the project. And that's not to say that the other working groups wouldn't have had more success. It was more just that in the only 2, and then with no cost 3-year span of the grant, having things that are very clear tasks to work on as a group with limited resources was helpful in contributing to success.
So I'll add my 2
Thanks,
cents
Ginger.
here.
I think, Nina, you want to add?
Yeah. So I think from my perspective, the commitment of the partners was amazing. You know, our steering committee in particular was really engaged in all the efforts, led work groups, et cetera. And then I think the sharing or the cross-pollination of ideas and support, it was fun to watch partners across states, you know, say, oh, let's meet afterwards. I want to hear more about that. Or what's the funding source of where that came from? Let's connect and see how we might collaborate. So those were all kinds of those things that were happening as well. And then the best practice sharing that happened at all the network meetings, everywhere from programs that were happening on the reservations in Idaho to the National STEM strategic plan was presented by White House staff. The diversity of that, of the resources that we were able to bring to the table, I think really generated a lot of enthusiasm and good ideas. And it was a lot of fun too.
That always helps group work.
It does, it does.
Okay, so I'm gonna ask us to switch gears a little bit and now share what did you think didn't go as smoothly, right? It's always fun to name the ways in which things were successful, and that feels really good and it's very important. And I think there's also a lot to be learned, right, from the things that didn't quite go as planned. So any one of you would like to jump in and share that?
I'm happy to start. This is Ginger. One of the things, I'll share a couple of things that were challenges from my perspective. One was that finding common ground to take action was a challenge because of the diversity of participating organizations and individuals in the work. That's a strength, but it's also a challenge. In IM STEM, there were folks who had state level policy purview, as well as those who had just district level purview. And in such a short span of time, figuring out how to work together and what to prioritize given those different purviews, I think was a challenge. And then the other challenge I'll share, just because I'm an evaluator, was how you evaluate such a complex initiative. How do you evaluate collective impact? Is super fun and challenging, and especially one that's in its early stages and limited resources. How you figure out what does quote unquote success look like, and how do you agree on how to measure that success?
Thank you, Ginger.
Well, and I can jump in to kind of piggyback a little on what Ginger was saying about finding common ground. And in working through the report, I realized that we didn't really have a theory of change. We were all very committed to the idea of broadening participation in STEM, and there was no lack of passion and commitment and incredible background of all the partners, but we didn't really have time or the opportunity necessarily to dig into what is that we together could change as a result of our work together. And I think that does start to come back to what Ginger was saying, that we had people working at all different levels of the system. And so that's a strength, but it also is certainly a challenge when you're trying to think of things that you might be doing together And I don't think we did a lot of work around root causes, and I think that that would have been helpful as well. But certainly we were constrained by resources and things like how long our project was. So this is not a criticism of the work, but just sort of an observation after having been through it for a couple of years.
So my comment in this area is similar, but it was really, I think from the perspective of the backbone, the challenge around facilitating this work is knowing when to push and when to not, I guess is the best way to put it. So trying to figure out the best way to dig deep into the network to increase engagement without driving too hard. And I think that the challenge around the fact that we had this 2-year grant, which we were able to extend to 3 years, got the backbone out too much in front in the leadership role, and that taking time to bring people into the work in a way that they take on really strong leadership roles, and that the backbone staff is in a supportive position, I think will would have and will improve the way in which the network grows. So I think that was something that I found challenging myself, being involved from the backbone side, and keep in mind as we move forward.
Yeah, and I appreciate so much of what each of you have shared. So I think there's a piece that we sometimes take for granted when we invite folks to collective impact, because there is no shortage of passion. I think we tend to assume that translates into the skill around collaboration. And so we don't always name the fact that all of us are coming to collaborative work with different skill sets and different experiences that we just really don't talk about, but influence our ability to do this work well, right? So I think that's one thing. And then the other thing I think that impacts is, to all of your points, is a theory of change. So I think many of us are accustomed to kind of thinking about, how do we approach our work from the place of our organization or our role, but making that shift from that space to a collective impact space where we're actually talking about systems change. And sometimes we assume, yet again, that everyone has the same definition for what is systems change and what that requires, right? So there isn't the naming of things explicitly, like systems change takes time, and many folks are coming to this with a perspective around creating immediate change through their roles in their organizations, and this is going to feel different. And so then there's also the question of, as we name the ecosystem, where do we think we can affect change? Ultimately, what is our theory of change, right? And sometimes those are pieces that have to be named so that we can actually make progress, but they're not always inherent in these opportunities. And I think a lot of collective impact efforts learn as they go, because the work is so nuanced, based on people who are participating, sectors, and the time and space that you have to accomplish something. So thank you for that. The last question I had was, what are recommendations that you think we can carry into the Alliance proposal going forward?
Mimi, do you want to take the first crack?
Okay. Okay, sure. So again, sort of building on Sylvia, on what you said, that this really does take time and it needs to be organic. It can't be pushed and forced to meet some grant deadline that basically makes it difficult to really be able to work on building leadership. We need The theory of change component, I think, is critical also, to stay focused on a doable vision or goal that maybe not everyone's going to buy into because their organization isn't necessarily committed to that component of the work. You know, the fact that this time we are specifically saying that we're going to focus on middle school. I mean, you know, the Boil the Ocean, if you've read the report, you'll see that one of the recommendations is about don't boil the ocean. And so we're trying to take that on and make the work focused on a particular transition point in the education pipeline that we think we can actually affect some change. I will say that the fact that we're doing this in a national perspective is really unusual. One of the things we tried to address in the report also is collective impact is typically done at the community level when you look at the model. And for us to try to lay it on to in the pilot in a 6-state approach, and of course in the next effort we're going to try to do this nationally, there are some challenges around making that happen. And initially for us, doing everything virtually was a little bit stilted and unusual, but I have to tell you, after COVID and even though we're all Zoomed to death, we're all so used to meeting this way and doing things this way, it became very natural. And so that's a good sign. I think that's something that we're going to see as we move forward, that we'll do a better job working in this type of environment, and that'll help sustain the effort as well. So. There we go.
Yeah. What she said, actually what both Mimi and Sylvia said, I think absolutely the theory of change piece is really critical, of identifying not just where you want to end up, the vision, but how you're going to get there. So what are the key levers that you as a collective are going to focus on and think are the most important and most likely to lead to the change that you want to see. I think that's really important. And as Mimi also said, I think it's exciting that, you know, one of the challenges with IM STEM was it was a very short grant. You apply to the funder. You basically kind of had to have a plan in place, which is antithetical to the way collective impact should work. And now with this planning grant, there's this opportunity to much more organically get some input and collectively craft at least a starting theory of change to hopefully lead into several years of work together.
And I'll just add on, since we spent a lot of time working on this report, I think one of the things that I wanted to share with you going forward is that this work is hard and it takes a lot of effort. And it actually, I was thinking, well, why would I recommend to somebody that they do collective impact? And it really comes down to it. I think it is the only way that we're going to have the system change that we need to actually change those systems at the level that is going to be real change. So I think I'm also hopeful for you all as you set off on this journey. And I think I wanted to also say, you don't have to have it figured out from the beginning. As Mimi was saying, you know, this is something that can grow organically, but you have to build into the process ways to reflect on where you are and who's at the table and what's the vision and how are you going to get there that Ginger mentioned. So I think this is an exciting time for this new project, thinking about collective impact. And I'm not part of your project, but I'll definitely be there cheering you on. And I really am looking forward to the successes that you'll have in your new project.
Thank you all for naming all of those important pieces and just for sharing the lessons learned. You know, Mimi, you named something that is, I mean, supremely important, and that is that you're absolutely right. There are very few examples of where collective impact is actually happening nationally. And so I think it's pretty amazing to be thinking about trying to take that on through this planning process of We Are STEM. And I know you're going to talk a little bit more about that and how that leads into the Alliance proposal, but it's tremendous to really think about even thinking about that type of undertaking. But to your point also, one of you mentioned that I'm not really sure there's another way to create the kind of system change that we want to see, so that we're not in this same space 20 years from now, still talking about how is it that we're going to address the need to create more equity in STEM and CTE. So I want to thank you all. And also, we have a couple minutes. So if you have a question for the panelists, I think we have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions. I know I saw a lot of activity in the chat, and I apologize, I couldn't get to all of it, but feel free, if you have any questions, to just go ahead and unmute.
So Mimi, can you talk some about We Are STEM and CTE in the middle grades, about how people will get to know more about that going forward?
So that's the next item on the agenda. So we wanted to share a little bit about I'm STEM and the lessons that we learned, and then we're going to get right into the We Are STEM next. So thank you, Tegwin, for setting the stage.
You're welcome.
But if anybody has any questions about the I'm STEM work that the pilot work that we just did for the last 3 years, now's a good time to ask that.
Or maybe you all just did such a phenomenal job.
We are amazing.
Yeah, I know, right? Okay, we can go ahead and take Tegwin up on her offer to transition over to We Are STEM meeting.
All right. So we clearly have referenced this work throughout our presentation so far and the discussions that we've had. And let me just sort of set the stage for the effort that we're going to implement in today's meeting and give you a little bit of background about what we've done so far. So Ginger mentioned in her comment about how antithetical it is to write a proposal about a planning process that, anyway, it doesn't make a lot of sense. But the steering committee has struggled a little bit with this vision and mission concept. We will be doing some work with you today to address this. And again, as we had talked about earlier, the effort around collective impact requires constant vigilance about reminding ourselves about why we're here. And so the future of this effort for us is about closing equity and opportunity gaps in STEM education and CTE for students in grades 5 through 10. And Ben sort of set that stage for us a little bit at the beginning. You know, Perkins 5 now works back to 5th grade, and we have a lot of career and technical education programs across this country that are not accessible by students until they're in the 11th grade, because CTE is frequently a 11th, 12th grade engagement for students. So we really felt that there was this sort of, it's a pretty wide gap, wide range of grade levels, but that those are the places where the critical decisions are being made, students make about their STEM projection and where they're going to end up, as well as their engagement in CTE. And we think we can do this through a national collective impact process, very similar to what we did with 6 states. So we're not convinced yet that this is not a process that works. We think it does work, and so we want to continue to test it and to engage in this. But again, remember, we received a planning grant from the National Science Foundation, so we have this great luxury that we actually get to spend a year planning together rather than trying to just land here and start this alliance idea. I want to remind everybody again who the PI and co-PIs are. Remember that you can contact any of these folks at any time to ask them any questions about this effort. So please feel free to do that. And they're all on the call today too. So if you want to just go in the chat, you can probably have a private conversation with any of them if you'd like. We are actually setting up work groups, similar structure to the way we did this in I Am STEM. And you'll notice that if you recall Sylvia's presentation about the 5 elements of collective impact, we have designed the work groups to align with those 5 elements to ensure that the strategic plan addresses all of these components. And it just so happens that the solicitation for the NSF Includes Alliance proposal also includes these elements as well. And so part of the work group's job will be, the deliverables will be to prepare the sections of the strategic plan that align with these 6 areas. So there's you'll notice a research and evaluation component that is very important in this effort that we've added in as the 6th work group. Whoops, went a little too fast. We have co-chairs named for all of the work groups. So if you're starting to think about which work group you might be interested in being involved with, if you go to the We Are STEM and CTE webpage, and there's a banner on the right-hand side where you can identify your interest in participating as a partner, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. But all the work groups are described in that link. And really quickly, the partnerships work group will be looking at building our partners. Many of you who are here maybe for the first time might engage in this. I'll talk more about that in a minute. There's going to be a work group that's going to look at what we're going to do around setting goals and metrics, and also around data sharing across the country in regards to the measurements that we'll approach for measuring our success. Mutually reinforcing activities will all be about that theory of change concept. What are the things that we can do across the entire alliance that we think are going to have the potential to impact those goals and metrics that are being developed? Leadership and communication. Sylvia mentioned earlier about how we need to communicate a lot in this work in order to stay in touch with each other. So this will mean lots of things around how we have the website, of course, and the structures of whether we do some kind of a newsletter or an I don't know. The technology now, there's so many things we can do. So this group would be focused on developing a plan around communication and a plan around developing leadership within the alliance. The backbone work group will look at the role of the backbone in supporting the alliance and what the backbone needs to provide. And the research and evaluation work group will also be involved in developing a research agenda for the effort, as well as how the effort will be evaluated. So if you're interested in that field, that would be a work group you could participate in. The strategic plan itself will have a variety of ways that we're going to be collecting input. So of course, the steering committee has a significant role in providing input. And the steering committee consists of all of the co-PIs and the backbone staff. The partners group meetings, we've been holding those every couple of months, and so the next one is scheduled for May. If you're interested in considering becoming a partner in the effort around the planning phase, you can go to We Are STEM and CTE and sign up for that. We'll be looking at partners' assets and the commitments that they're able to make to bring to the strategic plan. Network convenings, this is the very first one. So you have joined us for the very first network convening, and we'll be doing these quarterly. And then we'll also be doing some crowdsourcing activities. All of these components will bring together information to inform the strategic plan for the Alliance, which will be submitted as a NSF Includes Alliance proposal in January of 22. So as far as, and I keep referring to being a partner. So the intention here is that we hope some of you will consider joining us as partners. The commitment for this is basically to attend partner meetings and bring your best thinking self to those meetings and sharing really good, of course, we all think that all of you have the most amazing ideas, and so we want to get that from you. We hope that you would participate on a work group as well. Work groups will meet approximately 1 to 2 times between the partner meetings. The partner meetings you'll see are in May, August, November, and February. So they'll be basically 3 partner meetings before we submit the proposal. The virtual convenings, this one that's happening today in April, of course, then we'll be doing another one in June and in August and October and December. So those will be happening quarterly. And then the final proposal to NSF will be submitted in January of 22. That's the timeline. These are the partners that have committed to date for being involved in this work. If you don't see your organization's name on here, now is the time to get involved. Our goal is to have 30 partner organizations, but we'd love to have as many as are interested in being involved in developing the concept around this alliance. So we hope that that you will do that. The website, this is just a screenshot so you can see down on the right-hand side, see where it says get involved, become a partner. Click on that link. There's a survey instrument that'll ask you just some information about who you are and your organization. It'll ask you also to select a work group that you might be interested in. And all the work group details are there, so you can get more information about the work groups. All right. So that's what our STEM and CTE is about at this point. Any questions, comments? Ask in the chat. How are we doing time-wise? Are we in good shape?
We are in very good shape, ma'am.
Okay, so we're catching up.
Any questions for Mimi? I think we had a couple in the chat that I see, Ben, you've shared that we will be meeting virtually, not in person.
Right.
And there's a question about putting up the partner list again. Yes,
Oh,
and
I'd be happy to put it back. There we go.
There it is. I think one of the things that may have been shared in this process, and especially as we're looking at the partners list, is the opportunity to really do a lot of peer learning, as well as sharing what are some of the challenges that each of us is experiencing, but then also to be able to come together and problem solve with each other is kind of an added benefit to collective impact work that sometimes we don't necessarily spend a whole lot of time celebrating or appreciating. And so as we look at the partners list in here, I just want us to keep that in mind, that that is something that you do get to walk away with when you are engaged in collective impact work. And frankly, sometimes it's just nice to be able to develop rapport with colleagues that you can call up and say, you know, what are you doing? Because this is a thing we're experiencing, and how have you been handling it? So you're developing a collaborative of thought partners. And in this particular case, we're talking about national partners and colleagues, which I find to always be incredibly helpful. Okay. I think we're ready.
So I saw that Jeanette just put in the chat that she's right. I don't know how that happened, but the Iowa Department of Education should be on this list as well. I just noticed that. So I will make that correction to the slides. As a matter of fact, I'll do it while we're talking.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yes, and we anticipate that this will be growing, hopefully on a weekly basis, with the different outreach opportunities and meetings and orientations that we're offering folks. So I think we're good if we want to go ahead and move on to the next slide.
All right. There.
Wonderful. So we mentioned earlier that there would actually be some participation that we would like to invite all of you to engage in. And so, Mimi, thank you for offering a lot of the details and the outline to We Are STEM and what it is that we're trying to accomplish, which again is not something that's typically accomplished at a national level, but I think that we're well positioned to be able to do that. And I'm excited about the process. So we're going to host a number of stakeholder meetings and opportunities to start to develop what is our shared vision, what is our common agenda, and how do we see ourselves, again, creating change within the systems in order to be able to broaden participation in STEM and CTE. So we're going to take a few moments, if we want to go on to the next slide, and break folks up into groups. Breakout groups 1 through 5, you're going to use the odd number frames in Jamboard. And breakout groups 6 through 10 use the even number frames in Jamboard. And Mimi and I think Kathleen have both put the Jamboard link in the chat. And I'm going to ask that within each within each breakout group, identify someone who's going to record the discussion and someone who can report on the discussion. So we're going to ask that everyone utilize the sticky notes within Jamboard to capture any thoughts and ideas. And I think I already shared, please make sure that you select someone who can report and someone who can record. So we can move on to the questions. What we want to know is, based on your experience, what are the barriers that contribute to the challenge of increasing the numbers of underserved middle grade students, again, middle grades 5 through 10, participating successfully in STEM and CTE? What are some successful strategies or opportunities you have witnessed in efforts to increase participation of underserved students, again, in the middle grades within STEM and CTE? And then ultimately, where do you see yourself and or the Alliance being able to affect change? So if you go over to the Jamboard, and Mimi, if we can go back up to the previous slide, just to remind folks. Once you're in your breakout group, if you're in 1 through 5, you'll use the odd number frames, and they're titled in Jamboard. And if you're in breakout groups 6 through 10, you'll use the even number frames. And we're going to give you, I'm looking at the time here. Kathleen, can you remind me how much time we have?
Uh, 25 minutes.
Okay, we've got a good bit of time to have you discuss these frames. And then we're going to have you come back together and share what you were able to discuss within your breakout groups. Sound good? And I think either Kathleen or Mimi has gotten us started, so.
I just wanted to wish everybody a great time. Enjoy your conversations. We'll be lurking around.
Okay, opening the rooms now.
Looks like we are getting folks back in the room. Is that right?
Yep.
Okay, great.
Because we were having such a great time, we weren't ready to go.
And here we were thinking that maybe it was a little bit too long. Thank you. And also thank you all for your patience with some of our technical difficulties. As I'm sure we've all learned over the course of the past year, technology is great when it works and not so much when it doesn't. So, so thank you. So I'm just going to open up the floor and ask who wants to share first. And it can be, again, some of what you were discussing in your groups with regard to the barriers, or it can also be some of the success strategies or opportunities that you shared. We saw there was quite quite a bit of information on the Jamboard, so great job.
This is Deborah from Florida. I'm willing to go first. So we had a great group that were very experienced professionals, and some of the barriers that we noticed was fifth graders are sort of not as mature as we would like for them to be. Some of that is lack of experience and exposure in our own local communities, whether you live in Washington, D.C. and you haven't seen the monument, or where I live here in Daytona Beach and they're a mile from the beach and they've never been. Susan is not with us, but she did say that students need those opportunities to grow and dream and know some of the possibilities that are out there and they don't know, resound at what they don't know. A barrier across the board was maintaining and recruiting qualified, experienced professionals and specialists with all the teacher certification requirements. And sometimes they just give up and leave, and then we've left with a void on somebody that may have made a difference in a student's life in becoming an engineer or the next astronaut. But thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. That was a lot of really great information, and I appreciate how it sounds like in your group you really named a lot of the different interconnected elements, which is so important, again, as we situate ourselves within collective impact work. It's the recognition that in order for us to create systems change, we have to acknowledge all the different levers and stakeholders and institutions that impact that system. So thank you. Anyone else want to offer what was shared in their group?
This is Tammy, and I've been nominated to share for our group. So
congratulations on that, Tammy.
I think we had a lot of good conversation, but one of the things that we did talk about was part of the barrier is and part of the problem is our vocational students, our teachers are still teaching in voc tech and not in career technical education, and that's a big problem. Trying to move them to make that difference. And as you can tell, I'm long-term CTE, but that STEM division between STEM and CTE, STEM high flyers, CTE, the kids that aren't going to college are going to do vocational kind of stuff. That's one of the things that we shared most. And one of our solutions was, of course, more CTSOs in middle school was what we would hope for as a way to get students to be able to get that experience without having to actually take the class, because sometimes the classes aren't available, although CTSO is co-curricular, so it might be a little bit hard. But just looking at finding policies that truly support the broadening of that participation. So I shared for us I'm in Hawaii, so we have one state system, so it's very hard to make change because you have to make it across the board, across the state. So I'm just trying to do a small thing at the 6 high schools and the 8 middle schools that I work with, just trying to encourage more. I actually have a motto, it's called expose, explore, and experience. So expose in the middle school, explore at the middle school, and then experience it at the high school, so that have a little bit more just getting it out there more. So I think if anyone else wants to jump in on my group, because we're kind of talking a lot. I can't remember everything.
No, that's great. I want to name something that we haven't touched on a whole lot, but I think you kind of built your entire sharing around, and that is, sometimes we talk about systems change and we talk about stakeholders. And I think sometimes we even name the fact that a lot of what we should do should be student-centered, or that we should center the beneficiary, in this case, our student. But we don't always, and I know I have fallen victim to this, thought about what have been the ways in which we actually tap into what the student is experiencing in the system. And I think you talked about a part of that when you talked about the stigma, or what are the narratives, right, that may actually really influence the barriers that we continue to try to approach. But sometimes I think, I know I've been in this space as an administrator, we tend to think about the solution and the institution or the process And it's been so incredibly helpful for me over the past few years as I've done collective impact work and worked with tremendous colleagues. Ashley Conrad is our Associate Director of Programs here for NAEP, who really reminds us a lot that student voice is important in the entire process, not just in our desire to create change for them, but really to think about how is it that we're thinking about creating solutions with them. And I appreciate what you named in terms of the narratives and how that can influence barriers as well as the solutions. And we've got about 3 minutes left. I'm wondering if anybody would like to share what was discussed in the group when you came across the frame with the question of where do you see yourself and or the Alliance being able to affect change?
I'll go ahead and share. Our group was talking about that. I'm going to call out Iowa as being a couple times listing that they have had some great work with their legislature to get some initiatives, statewide initiatives, and building relationships with partners. I think we heard echoed a couple people in our group about the importance of bringing business and industry to the table. So just as important as getting the student input into the process is getting their input as well. And so, and then also one of the, I think the larger collective pieces is sharing best practices, things that are working so you don't have to create everything from scratch and stumble on the way as well.
I appreciate that. The policy piece is so huge. The policy and advocacy piece is so huge. And I appreciate you naming that. Because sometimes I know that folks have made great strides in creating a lot of change within their influence or their spheres of influence. But then when you're talking about the scale of change that we're trying to create with collective impact, it is so difficult to do that without the kind of policy that can support the change that you want to see. So I really appreciate you naming the importance of legislative education and also creating opportunities, I think, within the stakeholder group or collective impact spaces around what is advocacy, making it really accessible to folks, and thinking even about toolkits. I've seen that in a couple different places, and with a lot of intention around who are the stakeholders that we want to have access to advocacy strategies so that they too can become a part of the change making that we're trying to see. Okay, so I really appreciate everything that was shared. I do want to share that if you would like to, following the meeting and go back, it seems like we had a little snafu on that first frame. Someone hit clear frame. So if you would like to type in your sticky note, if you had something on that first frame, we were able to capture all the other ones. Please do so because there were just so many great ideas, incredible information, and we just deeply value your perspective. Want to make sure that we don't lose that. We can go. Thank you, Mimi. You read my mind. We're going to go ahead and we wanted to share with you the opportunity again to think about how you can become engaged with We Are STEM. And so Mimi shared earlier that you can become a partner by filling out the information on the website under Get Involved. And as soon as you click Become a Partner, the form will allow you to input your information, to review the different descriptions for the work groups. But at any point, if you have any questions about joining a work group or you just want to think about maybe who else you want to refer for partnership in this work, please feel free to reach out to Mimi, Ben, myself, Kathleen, and we would love to make sure that we are building a really comprehensive group of partners, again, that can help us to address different parts of the systems change that we want to create We also want to share with you that there's still time to attend our NAEP National Summit for Educational Equity. And so we have that information here hyperlinked, but we can also put it in the chat. And we are seeing ourselves grow exponentially in terms of our summit. So the deadline is April 16th. If you're interested, please go ahead and check us out. And then the last thing is that we want to invite folks to be a part of our next virtual convening, and that's going to be on June 23rd from 2 to 4, and would love to have your input, your feedback. So one of the things that I know we have a little bit of time for is, in lieu of another survey that we could probably send you but won't, I'd like to ask if you could, in the chat, just share with us today what was most helpful about our time together today, and in our next convening, what would you like to see? So I'm gonna type that here in the chat. This is for my visual people. And then the second question, what would you like to see at the next convening? And while folks are entering that information, Mimi, we can move on to the next slide. Wonderful. So we've got about 5 minutes left, and I first and foremost just want to thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to come together and really think through some of these challenges, as well as invite you to shape the vision and the common agenda that I think we're going to be crafting for the National Alliance. But if you have any questions, now's your time. If you want to unmute, or just chocolate chip cookies now. Okay, I got your note. More intentional community building. Thank you. Small group discussions. Collaboration seems to be really something that's deeply appreciated. Thank you. Please continue to put that information in there. And again, we just have a few minutes, but if we have any questions for anybody who's had the opportunity to share today, please feel free to unmute. I'm continuing to see the collaboration and not feeling alone in the struggle. Amen to that. Excellent. I love that idea, Deborah. Engaging students and parents is definitely something that I think we can be intentional about going forward. Thank you. All right. I don't know if any of my colleagues want to share any last words before we end the session today.
Thanks to everyone for coming and sharing with us and being involved. We're looking forward to working with you all.
Absolutely. And we're going to stay on for a few more minutes. But again, just thank you.
So thank you to all of our facilitators and presenters and those who shared. And as Kathleen shared, we will be posting the meeting recording on the webpage, and we'll inform you all so that you can share this with others as well. Thank you for being a part of this work.